All right. Welcome back, Watershed friends. My name is Danielle Kalina again. We are back for week 2 of our program, Nature's Not Canceled. Last week, me and Sheila did a little thing about citizen science, but this week our topic is frogs. As you can see, I'm not in Sheila's backyard, and it's not daytime. It is very dark where we are, so we actually have some friends and experts today to help us. So we have SIU grad student Katie Wiesehan, and then we have Dr. Rick Essner, SIU biology professor, sorry about that, and they are going to teach us a little bit about frogs today. So stay tuned. We are going to be here for about a half hour.
Oh, you guys hear that?
Yes. Yeah, right away. They're calling just for you. So I'm going to have Dr. Essner take it away.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Danielle. What you're hearing right now is actually not an Illinois chorus frog, which is what we're here to talk about today. It's a close relative called the spring peeper, and it's a really neat frog. If you go out this time of year in your backyard, there's a good chance you'll see it. So it's a little tiny frog. They are in the tree frog family, but they're actually kind of weird because they're tree frogs that went down to the ground, and you'll know one when you see one because they'll have an X on their back. Okay? That's actually the scientific name is Pseudacris crucifer, which refers to that X, so very diagnostic. So the Illinois chorus frog is a species that I work on, and my students in my lab, Katie being one of them, and unlike the spring peeper, which is relatively common, the Illinois chorus frog is a really rare species. It's actually classified as threatened in the state of Illinois. And so there are a number of reasons that that's the case, and we'll talk about that. But just from a life history, kind of biology geek standpoint, it's a really cool frog. It is one of the more interesting frogs that I've ever encountered. And that's because we know very little about it, so there are a lot of questions with that frog to try to answer. And also because they spend almost their entire lives underground, like probably 11 and a half months out of the year, they are underground and we don't know what they're doing. But this short period of time, for like a couple weeks to maybe a month, is a period of time when you can see them above ground in certain places. And to kind of start off the story here, one of the reasons that we're in Edwardsville and where this species is found in the area around Edwardsville is just kind of a coincidence of geological history. And I have a picture here to show you. If you think about Illinois going back 12,000 years ago, you would have seen something like this. Glaciers melting, kind of like what's happening today all over the world with climate change. But at the end of the Pleistocene, 12,000 years ago in Illinois, these glaciers were melting. Some of them had been maybe 2,000 feet thick, and they start to melt. And then all of the rock and soil that they had pulverized over thousands of years started to, as it melted, that was released as glacial outwash. So you see all these eddies forming as the glacier melts. That would wash, basically into the big river systems. And so from these glaciers melting in northern Illinois, the big rocks and cobbles and things stayed close. That's what we call moraine. But the smaller stuff, like sand, made its way all the way down into this part of Illinois. Here locally, in this area around Edwardsville, Cahokia Creek carries a lot of that sand even to this day that originated further north. And so when you come down to this area, the habitat is unique. It's basically like beach sand, and I have a little bit here to show you. This is what it looks like. So it's kind of hard to imagine, but if you come down to this part of Edwardsville and the Pogue area and the American Bottom, it's like walking on a beach. And that's what these frogs, the Illinois chorus frog, that's their preferred habitat because they like to burrow through sand. So all the sand gets delivered down here, and about 4,000 to 8,000 years ago in the xerothermic period, we find Illinois starting to get warmer and actually get pretty hot. And so a lot of species from further west and further south move into this area, species that are adapted to desert-like conditions, and we start to see the formation of sand prairies. So this is a sand prairie. I can't show you that right now because it's kind of off limits because of the pandemic. that all the state of Illinois property is closed off. But we have one of these sand prairies that's managed in this area where we do a lot of our work. And there's a unique set of animal and plant species, a lot of bunch grasses, and some really unusual things that are from that drier period of time that manage to stick around, including prickly pear cactus. So if you go into this area, Heartlands Conservancy just purchased a 10-acre parcel of land called Pogue Sand Prairie, and you can hike through that and you will see species like prickly pear. Some of the animals that use this habitat, these kind of dry desert-like conditions with the birds. So those are pretty cool. We have a really unique herpetofaunal community as well as a plant community, but my favorite and kind of the subject of our research is this guy, the Illinois chorus frog, and just an amazing little frog. So it's really charismatic. They got these big eyes, and their forelimbs, if you look at them compared to some of their relatives, they're really kind of stocky and toad-like. And their forelimbs, I compare them to Popeye a lot because they actually use those stocky forelimbs to burrow through the soil, through the sand. So they're like moles, and and they dig forelimbs first, like moles. And they're probably the only species that I'm aware of that has been documented to feed underground. So they are underground, they're eating a lot of agricultural pests like cutworms and things, caterpillars, and they survive completely underground for most of the year. So you could tell an Illinois chorus frog, you could see this dark stripe through the eyes, you see there's like a little V shape on the back of their head, and then again, they're big stocky forelimbs. So really neat frogs found in the sand.
So in this week's quiz, we actually had a question in there about the very limited number of counties that this frog is found in. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so this frog, it has a really unusual distribution. So during the xerothermic period, they came up and migrated out of Texas and Oklahoma. So that kind of tells you, that they're really adapted to hotter, drier places. And they made their way up the Arkansas River, then the Mississippi River, all the way to this area. Wherever they found sand prairies, they managed to hang on. And so they made it all the way to Madison County. They went further up into Illinois along the Illinois River. So if you go up around Beardstown, there's a big population up there, several counties. And then if you go down to Horseshoe Lake in southern Illinois, that's where you find them. And then there's a few scattered populations in southeast Missouri and in northeast Arkansas. So those are the kinds of places where you find them, scattered distributions in sandy habitat. And they were formerly in places, they had a wider distribution. They were in Granite City at one point. They're now extirpated, which means that they're no longer found there. That's because of development. So they're missing from there. They used to be there. They used to be in South Roxana. They're gone from South Roxana. So the only place that they're found now in this area is in the Pogue area around Edwardsville. So we're doing our best to try to protect them, to make sure that they hang on. There are a lot of threats that we're studying in terms of their population. This is kind of a residential area, so a lot of them get hit by cars. Katie, what's your count right now? We've studied mortality in these frogs, and she could tell you a little bit more about that.
So far this year, I have tagged 154 frogs, and last year I tagged 74 frogs. And between those 2 years, last year I got 4 recaptures, and this year 6. So the good news is that there's quite a few frogs in this population still. There's definitely over 160, more closely probably 200 or more, which is really great news. So I'm just trying to figure out how many frogs there are. I'm putting a small microchip in them, just like you'd put in a pet dog or cat. And I'm also looking at their mortality on the road. As you heard, there were cars driving by, and as Dr. Essner said, a lot of times they get hit on the road, especially when it's raining and the road's wet. They're moving from one pond to another, or from the sand prairie to the pond or the flooded fields, and they get hit by cars a lot. So I'm also counting how many dead frogs that I find.
Not the happiest of data, but data nonetheless, right?
But
Data nonetheless.
it still happens.
Yes.
So one of the problems with a lot of the frogs in a large part of their range is that they're in the areas that are also used for agriculture. So in some places, like in Arkansas, they've leveled out all of the fields and they've gotten really efficient with like growing rice and other agriculture. So there aren't those depressions that they need. They need temporary ponds or ephemeral ponds to lay their eggs, and so. This year they're using this pond that you see behind you, this ephemeral pool that you see behind you, and this is just in a flooded field.
Imagine seeing that pond.
Yeah. So this is a little flooded field.
Yes,
and,
there you go. There you go.
This is, great. It's shallow so that fish don't live in it. Fish will eat their eggs and eat the frogs. So they have really specific set of conditions that they need. They need sand. They need standing water that will dry up as summer approaches. If it doesn't dry up, again, fish will take over, or bullfrogs, like all their predators. So they have a short window of time when they have to make it to these areas, lay their eggs. The eggs will develop, and then the froglets will hatch out, and then they have to go out and find a place to live.
So we have so one of the cool things about Facebook Live is that you guys can pose your questions live. So one of our viewers is asking, what's that sound?
Oh, so right there, what you hear, Katie, you want to tell them?
That's a western chorus frog. They're also closely related, just like the spring peeper, to the Illinois chorus frog. And I find them a lot in very similar locations. They pretty much cohabitate in most of the ponds and areas I find Illinois chorus frogs. As you can tell, they sound sort of like your finger running across a comb. Usually there's a lot more out here. The reason we're only hearing one spring peeper and one western or boreal chorus frog out here tonight is mostly because it's not raining, and it hasn't rained since Saturday. Frogs love the rain, so usually I'm out here and either it had just finished raining or I'm soaking wet because I'm out in the rain. It's dry and it's a little chilly tonight too. We've had some warm weather last week, so there's not very much activity out
So
here.
he must really want to be heard.
Yeah,
Or maybe he knew that we were out here. He knew that we were coming.
He loves you guys. And the males are the ones that are calling and making noise. They have a vocal sac, which we may be able to show you with one of the Illinois chorus frogs that we have. And they inflate that vocal sac, and that's what they use to call to attract females to the pond.
Yeah, we got another question too.
So what you're hearing, these are males. Only the males are calling, and the females respond to that. And we've discussed, like, how do the Illinois chorus frogs know where the ponds are when they come up out of the ground? And, we've speculated, but we think that they listen to these other frogs to find where a good pond is.
So like a social media network for frogs.
Yeah, they communicate.
Yes.
So we have another question.
Okay.
So someone's asking, how are the temporary pool sites doing?
So, yeah, Katie, you want to talk about that?
Well, it depends on which site you're talking about. One of the ponds we went to a lot last year, that was a private pond, that is flooded from Cahokia Creek, and so a lot of fish have gotten in there, and bullfrog tadpoles have survived. I checked it out every couple weeks throughout summer, fall, and winter, and there was water in it. It almost dried up in November, but with all the rain and flooding we're having across the Midwest last year and this year, they're just not going to be able to breed in that. But luckily, there is another pond that the Heartlands had acquired. There are some ponds in the Sand Prairie, some small ones, and then there's this field, and there's another flooded field nearby. And so the frogs, this is really honestly the perfect place. I did not hear them at all last year. Last year all I heard was toads and western chorus frogs. But thankfully, I drive with my windows down, listening for frogs, and I found them on the road right here on the other side of us. So I found Illinois chorus frogs this year, and this is where the majority of the frogs I've caught, of the 164 frogs, have been in here or on the road.
Awesome. apparently you have some former grad students chiming in as well
Oh,
that are basically,
I don't know if you want to
so
answer
say
those
hello. No, they're basically saying that they're happy to see the research continue.
Oh, yeah.
So
Very
yes,
cool.
yes.
Very cool. Yeah, we owe a
Yes.
debt of gratitude to this project has been going on for about 5 years, so
That's
we
awesome.
build on it every year, and yeah, so we owe some thanks to some people.
Fantastic.
They've been working on this for a while. But yeah, these kinds of pools are really essential, and they're really largely missing from a lot of the range. So that's one of the things that we've been working on, is trying to create more of this kind of habitat. And so we've created some little artificial ponds, you know, in the sand prairie in hopes that they'll start using them, and they've been using them recently, so that's working out pretty well. But yeah, and then the other thing is, you know, the road mortality. So if any of you listeners drive through this area, you know, tell everybody, hey, slow down on early spring nights when it's raining, because I mean, this year again, like, you know, we've seen like 60 dead frogs, and when your population, I think it was estimated at maybe 400 individuals back in the 90s.
Yeah.
That's a problem. So
Yeah.
you got to take it slow when frogs are out.
And you can see them on the road if you drive. I mean, I drive like 15 miles an hour. I'm not asking you to do that slow. But you can see them on the road. They may look like a rock or a leaf sometimes, but just drive slow. Try to not hit them. Same thing with turtles and snakes. And I've found a lot of dead salamanders earlier in mid-March. So just try to be really conscientious of that and not hitting animals crossing the road.
Good tip. Good tip. Okay. So are we ready to see what we have here?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
You need to hold that?
Well, you can get it, Katie.
For those of you that might have tuned in a little late, we are with SIUE Professor Rick Essner and his grad student Katie, and they are teaching us about this week's topic, and that is frogs.
And so while Katie's doing that, I'm going to show you, this is what the frogs look like when they're in the ponds in amplexus. So they have external fertilization, and see if you guys can see that.
Yep.
They have external fertilization, and so they will lay their eggs on emergent vegetation. So there will be like leaves and sticks and things, twigs sticking out of the water, and that's where they attach their strings of eggs, or clusters of eggs, I should say. In addition, that's what you find. This whole area has some really interesting species besides the Illinois chorus frog. There are a couple of salamanders that we find in the ponds. So tiger salamanders and smallmouth salamanders are very common in this area. We see them crossing the roads. There's another frog that's kind of a little less common around here called the plains leopard frog. So we see those too. And then this is a species that used to be present in this area and was pretty common, called the Massasauga, and it's oftentimes called the swamp rattler. It's a federally endangered species, and it's now gone from this area, and that's why, you know, I said extirpated. That means that they're locally extinct. The only population of this federally endangered species now is around Carlisle Lake, and so they were once really common. They're gone. We want to make sure that the Illinois chorus frogs don't end up with that little designation. So that's why we work on.
We're getting a lot of questions.
Yeah.
This is fantastic.
So I have one. Someone is asking, is there anything the state is doing to protect these frogs besides the endangered species protection?
Yeah, I mean, they are monitoring them. So throughout their range, they do call surveys, and they're trying to, you know, make sure that the status at least isn't getting worse. So they're doing that. They're also protecting by purchasing habitat. They built some artificial ponds for them further north. Around here, in terms of conservation, the Heartlands Conservancy is probably the biggest thing that's happening locally to protect these frogs, and we're really excited by that. And the state had a role in acquiring that property. The purchase was enabled because of some of the development that's happening in this area with the warehouses that are really close and in some cases infringing on their habitat, built on the habitat. And so there was some concern about it, and so they were able to acquire some additional land that will hopefully protect the frogs.
Yeah, Heartlands is great. If you all haven't checked them out yet, heartlandsconservancy.org. Okay, so Katie, I think our star of the show. Well, you and Rick are the stars of the show.
I'm holding
but
the star of the
actually,
show.
who do we have here?
An Illinois chorus frog.
Oh my goodness!
You want me to turn him towards the camera. There.
Yeah.
There he is.
So cute little guys.
Yeah, they're pretty small, and you can see their little arms. Their Popeye
Yeah,
arms.
they do have Popeye arms,
They
don't
do.
they?
And this is a male, so you can see his darker vocal sac there, which, of course, he's not in a pond, so he's not going to inflate that and call for us tonight. But normally he would. Don't want him to hop away from us.
And one of our other viewers just wanted to confirm, so it's just the males that call, right?
Yes. He doesn't like the light very much. But, yeah. They're
He's fantastic. Oh,
hopping away. Hopping on away.
So where would you put the microchip to tag them?
I put them... Sorry, guys.
it's okay.
I put them on, like, their side here. There's actually still some glue right there from when I put it in this guy last week. Try to insert it in this area so that it's on their side/back so that it's not interfering with any of their mobility. Even though it's a pretty small tag, these are pretty small frogs. So,
That's fantastic.
yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Katie and Rick, thank you
Oh,
so
we have
much.
one more question.
Oh, okay.
So someone wants to know, how can you tell the difference between a chorus frog and a spring peeper?
Okay, so this is, as you can see the back of this guy, we said the spring peeper has an X on its back. They're also like this where their base colors, you know, a light gray, tan, brown. I don't know what you call that color. And then they've got a darker X, whereas these guys, they have that V between their eyes here. And they have a racing stripe through their eye on the side. And then on their back, they've got either dots or lines, just kind of jumbled. I don't know what you call that, but they've got, mottled. And these guys are a little bit bigger than spring peepers. They're a little chunkier.
Yeah.
Their front limbs and
More toad-like.
their side, they're a little chunky, slightly larger.
And the other species that they're probably their closest relative would be these boreal or western
The
chorus
western
frogs.
chorus frogs.
And they're going to be much more gracile or slender than those frogs, than the Illinois chorus frogs, and they'll have 3 stripes down the back.
Yeah, they have 3 stripes running down. The western chorus frog has 3 thin stripes running down their back.
So those are the ones that sound like a comb, like rubbing your finger on a comb.
Okay.
And those are in lots of backyards. So I would encourage you, if you have like the ability to put out like a little pool of water or something, like a swimming pool, like a plastic swimming pool or something, if you could get it flush with the ground, they will breed in your backyard. That's happened to me lots of times.
Definitely.
So someone wants to know, so we have 2 questions. First one, what are the other varieties of chorus frogs? And then the other one is, what is an easy trick to tell the difference between a chorus frog call and a cricket frog call?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, cricket frogs are tough sometimes.
Yeah. So what I hear about cricket frogs, I think it works. When you hear a cricket frog, they sound like you're clicking marbles together
Okay.
versus the comb. So
Okay.
so if you imagine that, you know, like if you're rubbing your fingers on a comb, it's kind of it's a different sound than that clicking. I would encourage people to go to YouTube. Lots of frog calls on YouTube, and you know, every season I like to go through the list, so I know what I'm listening to, because sometimes you forget.
Yeah.
And you can find them
more.
all online. As far as the chorus frogs, we really just have this guy, the Illinois chorus frog, the boreal or western chorus frog, depending on who you talk to, and the spring peeper would be the only members of that group in this part of the state. If you go other parts of the country, you find other species of chorus frogs, but here we just have the 3 that are in that group.
And all the chorus frogs are going to look relatively similar to the western chorus frog. If you look up a picture, the western, although has 3 stripes on its back, other ones may have 2 stripes or slightly other pattern variations, but they're all generally the same size, and they've got markings between their eyes, and I think they all have that stripe going through their eye too, right?
All the
chorus frogs in the United States.
Most
of them.
You stumped me there. I'm not sure. I'm not sure it applies to everyone.
From my little field guidebook, I'm pretty
I'll
sure
take your word
that
for it.
they've all got that line through their eyes and between their eyes, and
That makes sense.
yeah.
The cricket frogs, the one that sound like marbles clicking. If you ever see those, they have a nice little upside down triangle on their head that makes it very easy to identify. And they're tiny. They're the smallest frogs
They're
that
really
we have
small, and they
in
look
this area.
more toad-like in that they have some
bumps on their skin.
But yeah, cricket frogs are also in the tree frog family, and so they're another example of a frog that probably started out in the trees and then evolutionarily they went down to the ground.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Well, I think we're getting close to our end here.
Okay.
I want to thank, and Danielle and I want to thank both of you guys for coming out here and making this possible, and also just more importantly for your research overall. Just to have humans spend a lot of their time and energies in really getting to know on a deep level habitat needs of a critter like this is so good to hear about, right? So we all need good news, and this is definitely one. And oh my goodness, he's fantastic. I think he wants to go back into his. He wants to go back. Let's put him back in so people can see that. So, and this is a habitat that you guys have attempted to mimic what he would normally be in, right?
Yep.
And you keep him back in the
there he
lab.
goes.
There he
He's
goes.
burrowing.
There he goes. Burrowing in action. Look at those Popeye arms. Look at that. He's like, I'm done, right?
He got his 15 minutes.
Oh, he's fantastic. Look at him go.
That's cool. I have not ever seen that, and I've been working with for over a year.
Wow.
So I just had never,
Look at him go.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a rare sight.
And he's tired.
Yeah. It's a lot of work.
Most frogs that burrow hind limbs first. So this guy's pretty interesting because of
Really
that forelimbs
cool.
first burrowing behavior.
So very cool. Well, he doesn't have a name, but I want to thank the frog.
Well, he has a
thank
number.
you for. Oh, he has a
Yeah,
number.
he's got a number.
He's got a number. So we thank the frog, and when we thank Dr. Essner and Katie, both
Thank
from
you
both
guys
from the
for
great
tuning
Southern
in.
Illinois University, Edwardsville,
Yeah,
right
thanks a
here.
lot.
So thanks you guys so much.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in, you guys. Thanks.